Hello, my friends, and everyone interested in this ancient text called the Bible. We are in chapters 18 and 19 of the book of Exodus. Be sure to read it for yourself, where at first we're going to see Moses is doing things the hard way, and it takes his father-in-law to help him see how to do things a little more efficiently and effectively as they make their way to the mountain of the Lord in Sinai, where God is going to reveal his ultimate purpose, intention, and work for this new people who once were slaves are now going to transition into royalty, and the framework that he lays out here actually might help us understand what's going on when he's talking about clean, unclean, holy, sanctification. Yeah, the Bible's about to get very real. We might get a little bit colorful, so buckle up and welcome to Dumb Christian. If you remember, when Moses first went back to Egypt, when he met up with Aaron, he actually brought with him his wife Zipporah and at least his son Gershon. They were all going to go. Aaron said, this actually isn't a great place. It's not a vacation spot, so you guys should probably go back to Jethro, Zipporah's father, Moses' father-in-law. So all this while, Zipporah and Moses' sons, Gershon, and we discover Eleazar, have been back home with Grandpa Jethro. Well, news of what God has been doing with the Israelites in Egypt, like I said, has spread like a viral video. It broke the internet of the ancient Middle East. And word is getting back to Jethro. Now, they're on their the group of Israel is on their way out of Egypt towards Sinai, and Jethro, Zipporah, and Moses' sons are over in Midian, which is on the other side of Sinai. The nation of Israel are kind of close to Sinai. They're not quite there yet. News has made it to Jethro about everything that's going on. He hears that they're getting close to Sinai. He thinks, wow, they're within walking distance. We could be there in a few days. Packs up the kids, sends he foxes Moses and he says, hey, we're on our way. I'm bringing your family. We're going to meet up with you. I can't wait to hear all about your adventures. This is crazy. Moses gets the note. When they show up at camp, he meets them on the outside of camp and they just start exchanging stories like, is this true? This is what I heard about what happened. I heard that the Nile was undrinkable. Oh, what's even more crazy is that it wasn't just undrinkable, it turned to blood. And so they're like going back and forth like, is this true? This is the story I heard. And Moses is like, whatever story you heard, it's either true or what truly happened is even crazier than what you happened. And so they're like laughing and so happy to see each other. It's been a couple months since since the Israelites have left Egypt, let alone Moses' journey back to Egypt, all this. Okay, they're like approach the edge of the camp, and Jethro, Zipporah, and Moses' sons see this massive group of people. Like, the last time they saw Moses, he probably sounded a little bit crazy, right? God told me to go free the Israelites from Egypt. Now, according to Jewish tradition, Jethro was one of Pharaoh's consultants when he was trying to decide what to do with the people of Israel. So Jethro, at least according to Jewish tradition, is aware of the size, the number of people. And if the Bible is giving us a literal number when it tells us how many people left Egypt, we're talking like somewhere between 2 and 3 million. And even if that's not a literal number that the Bible gives us, it's like a metaphor, it's still a massive amount of people. And Jethro, Zipporah, the sons, approach and they see, holy crap, it really happened. God really did use you to save all of the people. This is crazy. And so Jethro, they like get back to Moses' tent and they're just like, what was it like? What is God like? What is this God like? Remember, Jethro was the high priest of Midian, part of the lineage of Abraham, who worshipped and believed in Yahweh God. So he's at least familiar with Yahweh God. Yahweh God is probably part of the deities that he worships and leads the people in worshiping, because he's a high priest, right? So his job is to lead the people of Midian in the worship of whichever gods that they believe in. But Midian is a descendant of Abraham, right? So somewhere in that mix is Yahweh, and Jethro just kind of declares, wow, Yahweh really truly is the God of all gods. He is greater than all other gods. Now, this sentence is actually pretty important because we're going to discover some things about the language of the Hebrews in that day. And they were speaking in a way that they were familiar with, right? And there's a lot of Semitic tribes out there who have records of their own gods that talk about gods in a similar way. And here Jethro makes a very clear distinction. He says, wow, Yahweh is greater than the gods. He specifically uses Yahweh's name, Yahweh, to identify which God he's referring to, because throughout the Bible, Yahweh is only ever translated God, capital G, to identify the true God, to identify a specific entity. However, when he says Yahweh is greater than the gods, the Hebrew word there he's using is Yahweh is greater than Elohim. This is going to be a little bit tricky, especially for believers who have been around and familiar with a little bit the Hebrew language, because the first time we see Elohim, and several times throughout the Old Testament, it's translated God, capital G. We see it at the very beginning, creation, Elohim created. But what we need to understand is that the Old Testament actually uses this word Elohim 6 different ways to identify 6 different types of spiritual beings. So the word Elohim just refers to a supernatural spiritual being who does not have a body. And in the context, most frequently, it's understood that it's referring to God, Yahweh, capital G. But there is, in the ancient world, there's this understanding that there are these other spiritual beings who are not Yahweh, who they discovered to be in rebellion against Yahweh, the God who created them. But they've fallen into these patterns of worshiping these other Elohim, these other gods. And we might, like from a modern perspective, we might identify them or label them as angels and demons. And we kind of see a lot more of this language in the New Testament. But in the ancient world, they're really just thinking about spiritual beings. And we see that they've been, they have power in the world. They had power in Egypt. They literally believed they were the gods of these elements that God was at war with. God told Moses, I'm judging the Elohim, the gods of Egypt. We see that the gods are at work in Genesis 6, right? When they're creating some weird perverted hybrid of spiritual beings and human beings, right? And then they're at work again when the Tower of Babel gets dispersed and the gods begin cultivating that crossover hybrid perversion. And we see the Nephilim, the Rephidim, the giants who we just had an encounter with the Amalekites in chapter 17. And so that just kind of helps give us a framework, because what we're going to explore throughout the rest of Exodus, and as you continue to read the Bible, to understand that that's what the ancient original readers were thinking and what they were meaning when they wrote and read these books. And Jethro says, Yahweh is greater than the gods because, and the Hebrew literally translates, in the ways that they were arrogant, he has been proven to be greater. So they think they're hot shit. They're able to conjure up the worship and the recognition of all these people groups. They have power over these people groups. They can conjure up miracles and do supernatural things and get the people to do what they want them to. But this God, Yahweh, is actually literally greater than them. He's not just talk. He actually has the muscle to back it up, where the other guys don't. And so Jethro says, we have got to celebrate this because this really is incredible. Kind of up to this point, Moses has just kind of been like overwhelmed, I'm sure. And at this point, Jethro says, we've got to celebrate this. So they go and they get a burnt offering, some sort of animal, probably a sheep or a goat, and they offer it as a sacrifice. And the idea behind this is animals were incredibly valuable to the nomad tribes back then. They provided food, clothing. They were extremely valuable. And the act of taking one of these animals, killing it and burning it, it's not even just killing it and, offering it as its blood as a sacrifice like during the Passover. This is a burnt offering. It's burning the whole thing up and saying, God, it's all dedicated to you. This thing that's really valuable and important to me, I just give it completely to you because you are worthy of this thing. And that's just an ancient mindset, okay? So they take this valuable thing, they burn it up, they give it as a praise offering to the Lord, and that just kind of snowballs into this like massive rager. It's a huge party with strobe lights and glow sticks, and the whole night just goes crazy bananas in celebrating and worshiping Yahweh for what he did. It says that Aaron, Moses, Jethro, and the elders, it just says ate bread, but they are like having a festival. It says before the Lord. They were like, God, wow, we're eating, we're celebrating because of how amazing you are. And then the night just, they clock out. It's 2 a.m, pass out time. The next morning, Jethro sleeps in and the sun starts to break through the tent cracks, hits him in the face, and he kind of wakes up, shudders around. Everyone is gone. He walks around the kitchen. He grabs, he microwaves a cup of old coffee that was left over from the breakfast that he missed, and he kind of peers out the tent, and there's this line of people just outside his tent. Some of this is some liberties, but just go with me on it. He sees this line of people just outside his tent, and he asks somebody, what's this line for? Breakfast? Breakfast? Bro, it's 11:30. Where have you been? Well, what are you guys waiting in line for? And they say, well, we're waiting to see Moses. Waiting to see Moses. Why? So he sips his little Yeti cup as he walks to the front of the line. Excuse me, pardon me, gets to the front of the line, and he kind of nods at Moses like, what's going on? The guy at the front of the line says, hey, the line starts back there, doofus. And Jethro just kind of like, okay, whatever, buddy. And Moses makes eye contact with Jethro and says, all right, everybody, we're going to take 5-minute break. And everyone in the line just groans, oh, man, I've been waiting for hours. And, the head elf comes up and quiets everybody down. All right, just hold your horses. Moses meets up with Jethro, and Jethro's like, what is happening? What are you doing? And Moses says, well, everyone's kind of looking to me to make judgments and to decide, to resolve disputes. And a lot of people also have questions about God. And so I don't know, I'm just trying to do the best that I can to help the people figure out their issues and help them to know what God's will is and what God wants from them and who this God is. And Jethro says, boy, you are really dumb, for real. Like, this is not going to end well. This is not sustainable. You aren't going to be able to keep this up for very long, and it's not going to end well. Because what happens when you die? At some point you will die, and then what's going to happen to everyone? Well, they've spent their entire lives learning to depend on you for all the answers. It's also going to burn you out. They're going to get frustrated. Like, it's just going to snowball, and it's going to be really bad. And look, we don't have any reference that says God told Moses to do this. We just assume that Moses is doing this because he thinks it's what needs to be done, and he's just trying to do the best that he can. And Jethro says, let me help you out. I got an idea. Why don't you go bring the chiefs of the people, the elders, like the people who kind of represent the people. And from among them, pick honorable, godly, responsible, and respectable men, people who aren't going to accept a bribe, and let them act as judges to resolve disputes and help people figure their shit out. Like, you don't need to be dealing with every little thing going on in the camp. look, I get it. There are some issues that might be too big for them to handle. They can send those to you. And fair enough, not everyone is going to be able to answer questions about God, so let's leave that on your plate as well. But everything else, man, just let somebody else deal with it. In fact, what better way to prepare people to be a productive nation for God than to equip them and put them in places where they can practice being responsible and godly, right? So this is actually a really good thing. Trust me on this. It's going to save you a lot of time, headache, and energy in the long run. And so sure enough, Moses says, yeah, I actually think that's a great idea. So he appoints heads, chiefs, judges to judge, to be judges over the disputes, to resolve the issues of the people. And here's where we see a couple of different roles, offices, if you will, pop up in the community, in the nation of Israel. We've seen elders a couple times. And here we see, for the first time, judges. And this actually is going to help clarify, because for a long time, when I read the book of Judges, which is just a few books away from Exodus, I was always really confused. Like, wait, are they in charge? Like, what is it? Like, God, at that time, God is king. God is about to establish the nation that he is king. He is the one in charge, but he will designate judges, people to resolve disputes and make sure that people are abiding by the law, treating each other with dignity, right? So that's the role of a judge. In the context, in this chapter, we've already seen that elders have eaten with Moses, Jethro, Aaron when they were celebrating God. Here we see that elders are coming. We're about to see elders arrive when Moses is going to share a word from the Lord. And the word elders in this ancient Semitic tribe, the way that they operated was elders from communities or some of the tribes. There were there were actually 13 tribes, technically 11 full tribes and 2 half tribes. But there's 13 groups of people who identify by the children of Jacob, the tribe of Benjamin, Naphtali, Issachar, right? And in those groups, they're divided into subsects, groups and families and clans, and they have elders, people who are respected, people who are wise. They're not elected like we would think of a representative, but in many regards, they do represent the people group from which they come. So when Moses is calling the elders, these older, respectable, wise people from their groups are coming to represent the people. And this is actually going to be the way that they represent people later when there is a king and they come before the kings and they represent the people then as well. But they're not elected. This isn't like a government, a democracy that we're familiar with, but that's the best way that we can kind of wrap our heads around it. And this isn't necessarily an automatic way that anyone reading the Bible, especially in the Christian world or a church, should just assume this is the way that elders of a church body should be appointed or function. It's a different, this is a nation of people, okay? This isn't the church, and not that there isn't value to learn, but I just want to make sure that there's a clear distinction here. This is an ancient national group of people operating, functioning in a very certain way, and it isn't necessarily the framework to understand what the New Testament means when it's talking about elders in the church. Okay, just for that. So Moses adopts this new judgment system and this hierarchy of, people organizing and resolving issues. Jethro says, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. Can I go home now?" Moses says, "Yes. It was so nice to see you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your advice. I really appreciate it. I love you. I'll see you when I see you." Jethro heads back to Midian. It's been 3 months since they've left Egypt at this point, and we get to chapter 19. And they start to make their way to Sinai. They defeated the Amalekites, so they don't have that opposition in the way anymore, and they've made their way to the mountain. That's what's said here, the mountain in the region of Sinai. A very specific mountain that they were supposed to go to, also known as the mountain of God. Again, Sinai is not in Midian. It's not in Canaan. It's somewhere between Egypt and Midian. Okay. They get to the mountain, and God says to Moses, "All right, I want you to come up the mountain, I've got some instructions for you. There are 3 things I want you to tell the people. Remind them of the power that I demonstrated against Egypt. That this needs to be the first thing on their mind. They need to know that I am not to be taken lightly. I am Yahweh. There is no one else like me. Remind them of the power I demonstrated at Egypt, the way that I overcame Egypt, the way that I judged the gods, the way that I demonstrated I am above everything else. I'm not like any of these other gods that you might think lightly of. Number 1. Number 2, in light of that, I also want you to remind them that I have taken incredible care of them. I've protected them from Pharaoh. I protected them from my wrath, my fair and right judgment, against people and gods who have rebelled against me. And they've demonstrated rebellion against me, but I've still provided and protected for them. Remind them of that. When they were hungry, I gave them food. When they were thirsty, I gave them water. I gave them meat and bread. Remind them of how well I take care of them. Because the third thing that I want you to tell them is they're about to transition from a people of slavery to become royal priests. The entire group of Israel, all the people of Israel, are going to become a kingdom of priests to God. Now, the Israelite understanding of priests at that time is it's a very elite group of people. You have to go through training, you have to go through the high universities, and only a few people actually make it. God says every Israelite is going to be a priest. The whole nation will be a kingdom of priests. God is telling Moses they are about to be a beacon of light. They will be the conduit through which God reveals himself to the rest of the world, and they will be the connecting point for the rest of the world to come discover who this Yahweh God is. Now, there are about to be some rules and boundaries that God sets up, because he's going to say, look, it's not okay for us to mix Yahweh and other gods, Yahweh and my own way. Oh, yeah. Okay. That was clever. It's Yahweh and no one else. That's it. And so that's some of the boundaries and the parameters that we're going to get into. But he's also about to tell them what it means and why it's so important to be consecrated, set apart, holy, because God is not like any other gods. And so we cannot be contaminating, we cannot infiltrate these other worship practices, these other gods, these other pagan cultures in with what God is about to cultivate here in a kingdom of priests. Now, the nation of Israel will have their own set of priests who represent the people of Israel to God and God to them. But the whole nation is going to be this candle in the darkness that says, come here for the true light of the world. So Moses goes down and he gathers the elders. This is again where it says the elders. And in this section in 19, it actually kind of interchanges elders with all of the people, because the elders represent all of the people. So Moses gathers the elders and says, here are the 3 things that God wanted me to tell you. And then it says all the people respond with whatever God says we will do. So that's why elders and all the people are kind of interchangeable, because they fully represent the intentions and the desires of the people. Whatever God says, we will do it. And Moses says, okay, God's going to descend on this mountain in 3 days. You're going to hear a loud trumpet blast. And when you do, make sure you tell everybody that they come to the mountain. Don't touch the mountain. We're actually going to put up some caution tape so we don't cross a line, because if anyone comes and touches the mountain, they will die. We need to understand this consecration. This is going to be sacred ground. Sacred ground is wherever God is. Remember Eden? That was God's sacred ground. He walked with Adam and Eve. He told Moses, take your sandals off because you're on holy ground. There's something unique, special about where God is. And he's about to make a new sacred space on this mountain in Sinai. And he says, everyone, you better come and revere this, but don't touch it because you will die. God is about to descend and be present in a sacred space. 3 days, consecrate yourself. And then there's this weird phrase that says, and don't touch a woman. Again, we've already seen some like weird Hebrew euphemisms. When it says feet, it's a euphemism for genitalia. Here, don't touch a woman is just a euphemism for don't have sex. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. Because God is saying consecrate yourself, prepare yourself to be in a sacred space. And because that's where God is. And there's two things that are considered really like the life essence of a person, their blood and semen. So when the Bible talks about how during a woman's menstrual cycle, she's unclean, she's not, it's not that she's degraded and she's less valuable, but the reason is because she's lost some of her life essence, this idea, right? And when you're in the presence of God, no, there's no room for loss of life. The presence of God is sacred. It's a whole space to be where the fullness of life is like experienced and cultivated. And so he's saying for 3 days, don't have sex, really, or masturbation, right? Keep semen where it's stored in the balls. And sure enough, 3 days later, the camp wakes up. They go out to just outside the camp to collect their daily ration of manna. And as they look over at the mountain, wouldn't you know it, it's covered in thick, dark clouds like smoke. And the earth is starting to rumble. And then they hear a trumpet blast. Where is that coming from? Lightning and thunder surround the cloud on the mountain, and then it says that God descended to the mountain, almost like this Lord of the Rings thing, right, where this beam of light shoots down at the mountain and you can see this glowing ball descend into the cloud. They hear the trumpet. Everyone in the camp comes up to the caution tape on the mountain. Don't touch it. Aaron's kind of standing there. All right, everybody, back up. Let's give the mountain some air. And God calls Moses up to the mountain, and he says, Moses, come up here. Moses goes up, and there's going to be like some back and forth, going up the mountain and down the mountain, up the mountain, down the mountain. So Moses goes into the cloud, into the mountain, and everyone is terrified. And I think that's probably the right response. God is creating something brand new here. And it's unlike anything else, and it is terrifying. God tells Moses, all right, what I want you to do is you're going to go back down, remind everyone, don't touch the mountain. And then what I want you to do is I want you to bring Aaron up here. God is about to reveal the new identity of this people group and their purpose and work that he has for them to do in the world. It's not just, all right, we're going to be like every other nation in the world, we're just going to have a different God. No. God has work for them to do, a mission for this people to accomplish in the world. And they're going to lose track of it. They're going to fall. They're going to fail at what they're supposed to be doing. But the ultimate use that God is using this people from Abraham as part of fulfilling his promise to Abraham is to bring about the Messiah, who will be the ultimate beacon of light and hope to the entire world, offering restoration, salvation, a return to being a part of the family of God, God's original design and intention for everyone to be included, at least have the opportunity to be included. And so Moses goes down. Guys, remember, don't touch the mountain. I'm serious. I'm looking at you, Josiah. Aaron, God wants you, like you're in high school again. And Moses and Aaron go back up onto the mountain where God is about to lay down the law, literally. And it's going to start with the 10 Commandments, which we're not going to get into, but actually from a Jewish perspective, they're less frequently called the 10 Commandments, and they're actually more known as the 10 words. We're going to break down and get into why that is. But I think we also might just discover that the 10 Commandments might be something other than what we might be used to thinking about them as. We're going to save that for next time as God really unpacks what he means when he says you're going to be a kingdom of priests, you're going to be holy, you're going to be unlike any other national group or tribe or kingdom in the world for a very specific purpose. If you guys have enjoyed this content, please check out my sources below. I'm sure they would appreciate it. I'm not making all this up. I'm using some responsible doctors and scholars to help frame what I'm talking about. Share this with your friends, family, so don't go on this journey alone. Subscribe, and like so that you know, ring the bell so you know when new content drops, and I'll catch you in the next one. I love you guys.